I wanted to point today to Psalm 23. Psalm 23 is a very well known, very famous psalm, one that perhaps a surprising number of people are familiar with. And there's a lot of things that are packed into it, and its verses have often been repeated and reflected on. But I'm going to read it and just make a few quick comments, and hopefully ones that are helpful reflections. Psalm 23, a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. It's an incredibly positive psalm, and many psalms in the Bible are an interesting mixture. They have these contrasts. They feel like they're sending you one way and then the other way. You know, the mood is great and then it's bad, and the mood is bad and then it's better. You know, and there's a mixture of emotion. I often think that David is someone who had clearly strong emotions, and also the Psalms kind of give this indication that somehow those emotions kept switching rapidly, or whether he's just processing, these strengths of feeling back and forth. And the strange thing about Psalm 23 is very comfortable for us because it's an easy read. The whole psalm feels quite positive. There's no awkward verses in it that catch you unawares. And maybe that's an interesting one for us to kind of grapple with. Perhaps we find it a little bit harder to imagine that life has these contrasts, and that somehow we have a moment we feel close to God, then we feel angry, and then we feel, God, do something, fight back at them. We have this kind of strange mixtures in our own feelings, in our own life, in our own head. Maybe Psalm 23 is a little bit easier because it's a little bit more on a level. It's all generally quite nice. But it's talking as well about the journey that the sheep take with the shepherd. I was talking to a friend today and just thinking about that whole dynamic about shepherds and sheep. And, sheep have to have this relationship. I know in different cultures, perhaps how they understand the shepherd's role will vary, but there's definitely this rapport and this understanding and this sense of leadership, and the sheep are vulnerable and they behave in some strange ways, and they need to be kind of really guided quite a lot to go a direction, and they can be very much a herd mentality. You panic one and they all start running. We lived for a little while in rural Wales, and it was a very interesting experience of being a bit more close at hand to sheep, and seeing how they respond to you at the gate, and they all sort of start panicking and running the other way. And then I used to watch the sheepdogs as well, herding them in and things like that. Very interesting experience seeing it. And so the sheep's responsiveness to the shepherd is such a key thing. And in the Middle East, that's also very true. And it's very vital that the shepherd has this incredibly important job to try and help them get to the right pasture. And particularly in more barren and more challenging terrain, this is a very big issue in many parts of the world where there's a limited amount of grazing. The shepherd is guiding them to the grazing. He's trying to help them in the Middle East, particularly in Israel. Where the psalm's set, there aren't that many rivers really. In the heat of summer, water sources are very, very crucial, and it's not like the UK where we would tend to be thinking of sheep as, generally speaking, being able to find green pastures most of the time. In most areas they're going to be, they can spread across the field, and there's plenty of grass basically. But that's not the case in many places in the world, and really the shepherd's role becomes even more crucial. He's not just using sheep to try and keep the grass to a certain level, but he's actually needing to work quite hard at directing them to find pastures where they need to go. There's a lot of challenges for them. This whole thing about anointing with oil as well. Apparently, from what I understand, it was around this whole thing of actually anointing around the nasal passages, around this part of the sheep, because these flies would get in, and in the heat they get in and lay eggs and torment the sheep, and so he's trying to care for them, that basically look after their head, make sure that they're not being tormented. And there's a blessing that he gives to them in a sense of just easing discomfort, of taking them down the right route, and helping them and protecting them, and fighting off. In some cultures too, it's a big deal with wild animals. It's a big deal with wolves and so on. There's a real threat. Sheep are certainly a target for predators. And it's very important that actually they are protected and guarded properly. And so these themes, I think, come out from this psalm, and my prayer is really that we would walk in God's ways. We'd find that sense of protection. We'd find that sense of relief, of peace, of Him leading us, of being gently led, but being clearly in His path, of knowing Him to be a safe voice, of knowing Him to take us where we need to go, of dependence, and that sense of that if we are obedient, if we walk in His paths, we will reap the benefits. We will be in a safe place. We will be led by a good shepherd. John 10 talks about that, the Gospel of John, and that's very much the theme that Jesus raises there too, that He's the good shepherd. He's the one who cares. Psalm 95 says, we're the sheep of His pasture, the flock under His care. We're very much related to that analogy, to that illustration. So I pray that we would walk in His ways and find that sense of ultimately being under the gracious, loving, compassionate care of the shepherd, the true shepherd, who is Jesus.